Today I will explore Simone Freud's paper called The Dynamics of Transference, written in 1912. This paper explores the hidden patterns that shape how we relate to other people and how these patterns influence how we form and experience relationship with others. In this paper, Freud is fundamentally destroying the illusion of our autonomy in relationships, which is the idea that we are in control and that we operate under the assumption that when we meet someone new, we are reacting to them as a fresh and new individuals in our lives. When we meet someone new, we believe we are making conscious, rational assessments of their character. And Freud says that we are doing nothing of the sort, not even close to that. For Freud, we are reacting to prototypes, that we are overlaying the present with the past, whether that is with a friend, neighbor, or a partner, or even a physician. In the paper, Freud says that every person develops a particular way of handling their erotic life. Now, in 1912 psychoanalytic language, the phrase erotic life does not mean sexuality. It refers more broadly to how we form emotional connection with others. It includes how we look for love, what conditions need to be present for us to fall in love, the kinds of desires or instincts we want to satisfy, and the goals we pursue in our relationships. Freud believed that this personal style of relating is shaped by two forces working together: nature and nurture. Nature refers to the traits and drives we are born with. Nurture refers to our experiences growing up, especially our early relationships. The condition of these two forces creates what Freud called a stereotype plate. This is like a printing plate used in old printing presses. Once the plate is made, it can be used to print the same pattern again and again. Freud's idea was that people tend to repeat the same relationship patterns throughout their lives. Even though the people in their lives change, the emotional pattern often stays very similar, almost like the same design being printed repeatedly with the inner plate. In this paper, Freud suggests that our capacity for love and connection operates with this rigidity because we do not invent a new way of loving a new person we encounter, since we just unconsciously reuse the plate. Now, this rigidity may sound very deterministic, strict, and fixed, but Freud adds an important point. He says that this pattern is not completely unable to change. New experiences in life can modify it a little bit, but Freud also stresses that the main structure of this pattern usually stays very stable and lasting over time. To explain this, imagine a relationship pattern. Suppose a person grew up with a caregiver who was very critical and only showed love when the child was perfect. Love dependent on meeting strict expectations. This becomes a person's inner relationship pattern. When this person becomes an adult, they may not choose partners who are openly cruel, but without realizing it, they often become attached to people who are emotionally distant, critical, or impossible to please. In this way, they keep repeating the same pattern from childhood, always trying to gain the approval and love that once depended on being perfect. Now, in analytic setting, transference is usually directed towards the psychoanalyst. Freud designed the psychoanalysis in a way that encourages this to happen. Freud advised psychoanalysts to act like a blank screen. This means that they reveal very little about themselves, so the patient's feelings and expectations can easily be placed onto them. Freud explained that emotional energy that is already waiting in the mind can then attach itself to the figure of the doctor. Because of this, the psychoanalyst may come to represent an old authority figure from the patient's early life, such as a parent. In the unconscious mind, this figure may carry feelings of power, judgment, approval, or rejection. When these feelings are placed onto the psychoanalyst, the patient is not really reacting to the analyst as a person. Instead, they are responding to an internal image built from early relationships. So when Freud says that patients place a father or a mother onto the doctor, it does not mean that the patient believes the psychoanalyst is the real parent. It means that the patient is relating to the analyst through an internalized image of that early authority figure stored in the unconscious. And when this happens in analysis, we can see how much the patient has been dismissed, mistreated, and emotionally hurt throughout their lives. This projection is a great material to be worked in analysis, since the patient is so hurt that a new person in their life, in this case the analyst, is seen as the caregiver, which is an internalized image object. Freud says that transference towards the psychoanalyst has a special feature. The patient's feelings towards the doctor, in other words, the projection is much more stronger than the present situation really is, which also seems irrational because the patient reacts to the doctor in ways that do not match what the doctor has actually done or said. For example, imagine the analyst looks at the clock and ends the session at the normal time. A reasonable reaction might be a simple disappointment that the conversation has to stop. But sometimes the patient reacts very strongly. They may feel deeply abandoned, accuse the analyst of being cold, and fall into intense sadness. These reactions are bigger than the situation itself. The end of a normal session cannot explain such powerful emotion. What is really happening is that old feelings from childhood are being released. The patient is not only reacting to the session ending. In the patient's inner world, the analyst has become a parent figure who often withdrew love. Now, transference does not only happen in therapy, it also happens in everyday life. For example, a person may react very defensively when a manager gives a calm and harmless feedback. The reaction may seem too strong for the situation. What is really happening is that the person is unconsciously repeating an old conflict, perhaps a long-standing struggle with a sibling. The manager did not cause the old problem. They simply triggered the old pattern in the person's mind. But Freud focuses more on the clinical setting because transference presents him with two huge puzzles for psychoanalysis. The first one is, why does transference become much stronger and less controlled in neurotic patients who are going through psychoanalysis compared with people who are not in therapy? In other words, why does therapy seem to intensify the problem instead of calming it down? In 1912, Freud faced a problem that could seriously harm his reputation. If transference only becomes stronger during psychoanalysis, and if it were true, it would make psychoanalysis look like it was creating the problem in the patient's mind rather than solving it. Freud argued that this claim was simply not true. He said that transference does not appear more intensely in psychoanalysis than in other places. To support his argument, he pointed to the mental health institutions that existed at the time, such as sanitariums and asylums, where people with nervous or emotional problems were treated before psychoanalysis became popular. Freud said that in those places, transference also appeared and sometimes even more strongly. In fact, he wrote that it could show up with the highest intensity in the most unworthy forms. His point was simple. These reactions were not caused by psychoanalysis. They were already part of how people behave in relationships. Psychoanalysis just made those hidden patterns visible. Freud concluded that the strong emotions in transference are not caused by psychoanalysis itself. Instead, they come from the neuroses that the person already has. Psychoanalysis simply creates a safe and structured setting where these hidden reactions become visible and can be studied and worked through. Freud believes that when a person's libido, their emotional energy is blocked or deeply frustrated, it builds up inside them. When that happens, the person will often redirect those feelings onto someone in authority. The exact person does not matter much. It depends on the situation the person is in. For example, if the person is in a sanitarium, the feelings might be redirected at the head doctor. Or if the person is in a school, the feelings might be redirected at the teacher. The psychoanalyst is simply the latest person in line. According to Freud, this is part of a general human pattern, not something created by therapy itself. The second puzzle is why transference emerged in psychoanalytic treatment as resistance. Transference in psychoanalysis becomes a form of resistance because the patient's unconscious mind uses it as a strong way to stop the psychoanalyst from discovering thoughts and feelings that were pushed down and hidden. As said earlier, transference also happens in normal life outside therapy. People often place feelings from past relationships onto new people without noticing it. But in the therapy room, it becomes a problem since the goal of psychoanalysis is to uncover hidden memories and feelings. So transference can block this process because the patient's unconscious uses it to protect those hidden parts of the mind. Freud explains this phenomenon of resistance through several key dynamics. The first one is the protection of the status quo. Freud explains that in neurosis, the person's emotional energy, libido, turns away from reality and moves into the unconscious. In this paper, Freud said that Carl Jung called this process introversion. Psychoanalysis tries to follow this path, find the hidden libido, bring it into consciousness, and help the person uses it again to reality. When analysis gets too close to the hidden places, resistance appears. The same forces that pushed the libido away from reality now try to stop the treatment. The second one is transference as a tactical compromise. Transference can act like a compromise between the psychoanalyst's effort to discover hidden problems and the patient's unconscious effort to keep them hidden. When therapy gets close to the deep root of a hidden emotional problem in the unconscious, resistance becomes very strong. At this point, the patient's mind does not allow the real hidden thought to appear directly. Instead, the mind produces another thought that's easier to accept. This new thought is often a transverse idea. The unconscious prefers this because it works like a distraction or shield. It keeps attention away from the real hidden problem. As therapy continues, the patient's mind uses transference more and more because it's the easiest way to avoid revealing the real painful material that caused the neurosis. The third one is the specific types of transference resistance. Not all transference acts as resistance. Freud distinguishes between different forms to explain the puzzle of why transference emerges in psychoanalytic treatment as resistance. Positive transference of repressed erotic impulses. This involves unconscious desires that have been redirected towards the psychoanalyst. Negative transference. This involves the transfer of hostile feelings towards the analyst. And the fourth one, acting out versus remembering. In psychoanalysis, there is a conflict between remembering and acting out. The psychoanalytical treatment wants the patient to remember hidden thoughts and feelings from the past, but the unconscious mind does not want to remember them. Instead, it tries to repeat them through actions and emotions. Because the unconscious mind is timeless, old impulses appear to the patient as if they were happening now. The patient experiences them as real and present and wants to express them through feelings and behavior instead of simply thinking about them. This struggle happens mostly through transference, where the patient redirects these feelings towards the analyst. The analyst tries to help the patient understand these feelings while the patient unconscious tries to act them out. However, this resistance is also helpful. It brings the patient's hidden emotional impulses into the open, making them visible in the therapy room. Because they appear directly, the psychoanalyst and patient can recognize and work through them together.